Well, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone, and hope you all had a very nice Thanksgiving. This video is for John Chinn and his daughters because they like to watch YouTube videos and they've seen some of the Fortune Cookie 45 LC videos. Hi to you, and the subject of this video is determining seating depth for our bullets made easy. So let's start off with commercial jacketed bullets for our handguns. Our handguns are going to be either revolvers or automatic pistols. So you can see that for revolver bullets, the jacketed bullets have a canalure. And with that canalure, all you've got to do is set the case mouth to be in the upper half of the canalure, crimp it there, and you're in business. That will function and feed in any 41 Magnum revolver. The seating depth is irrelevant once you crimp it there. Of course, you could measure it if you want to, but it's not necessary. Now for our fine semi-automatic pistols, the manufacturers like Speer makes, for instance, this gold dot 9mm, 115 grain 9mm hollow point jacketed bullet. Well, how do you determine the seating depth for one of these? And here's what they look like. There's no canalure. So what you can do is to go ahead and seat this bullet a little bit on the long side and then drop it into the barrel of your semi-automatic pistol, and it doesn't chamber. So then you seat it a little deeper and you drop it in the chamber again, and pretty soon the round will chamber. Then you check it in the magazine to make sure it'll feed in the magazine, and then whatever that overall length is, you can measure it, and that's what you have for your overall length. Now you can also take the round and drop it into a case gauge or a cartridge gauge, and if the round drops into the cartridge gauge, once again you're good. If it doesn't drop in, it means your overall length is a little bit on the long side, and you've got to seat it a little deeper. Pretty soon the round drops into the case gauge. Then check it in the magazine to make sure the rounds chamber and function in the magazine, and once you've got that, that's it. Measure the overall length and then write it down in your data, but also on the inside of your cartridge box. Finally, the way you can do it, and the way a lot of people do it, is just look up in the reloading manual for the Speer 115 grain gold dot jacketed hollow point bullet. Look up what the overall length is there and write it down on the inside of the box once again like this. Then when you seat your bullet, seat it to that depth and you're going to be okay. So that's how you determine the seating depth on a semi-automatic pistol. You can either do it on your own or look it up in the reloading manuals. No canalures to help you here. Plus, you're going to use a taper crimp die to crimp these. No roll crimp for semi-automatic pistols. Well, to John Chinn and his daughters, what happens if you start loading rifle? And here's a very popular bullet for the 223 Remington. It's the Nosler ballistic tip 55 grain polymer tip. And you can get them in 250 bullet packs like this. Let's look at those bullets. They call them varmint packs because the purpose is to take out varmints by the pack. Now when you look at these bullets, they are without canalures. So once again, you can load these to be used as single load in your AR-15 or your bolt action rifles by seating the bullets out on the long side, and then as you chamber, if the round won't chamber, seat it a little deeper and try again until it barely chambers. Then seat it anywhere from 6/1000 to 9/1000 shorter than that, and you've got a good seating depth. However, when you load them long like that, they probably will not function in your bolt action blind magazine, neither will they function in your standard AR magazine. So then you've got to load them deeper or seat them deeper, and then you might as well just go by what the loading manual says, because they give you a seating depth that will function in magazines and blind magazines. And for this bullet, it happens to be 2.260 inches overall length. So I always write that overall length on the inside of the box. Now you can also determine the length to reach the lands of your rifle by using a stony point gauge or the now Hornady stony point gauge. And that's on another video. We won't go into that here. Now the same applies to other calibers besides 22 or 223, and for instance your 30 caliber Sierra 168 grain match bullet, very popular bullet for high power rifle shooting. This bullet, no canalure. So you would seat it and use a stony point gauge to determine the distance to the lands, and then you can load your rounds 0.006 to 0.009 shorter than that. Or for other stages that require feeding through the magazine, you can simply go right to your reloading manual and go with what's there. In the case of the 308, it's 2.800 overall length. For a 30-06, 3.340 overall length, and set your seating depth at that. And once again, we don't normally crimp those. We just set the seating depth right there and rely on the bullet neck tension to hold the bullet in place, and that is fine as long as our dies are properly regulated, and most of them are. Now some rifle bullets like these Hornady 139 grain 7mm, they actually have a canalure for you, so you can crimp your bullet right there at the top half of that canalure and be fine for use in your regular magazines, in your bolt action rifles. Now a lot of times we don't want to crimp, but we can set the case mouth right there for seating depth, and that's fine also. So John Chinn and his daughters might ask, well, what about cast bullets? And thank you, I'm glad you asked. I get asked a lot what my overall length is on my finished rounds, because on a lot of my videos I don't bother to say what the overall length is. So I get a lot of those questions. Well, the answer is that I don't know how long the overall length is on a lot of my rounds, because the bullet design already tells me where I should be seating the bullets. And once you seat it there, that's right. Whatever the length it is, it's right, because they work and they were designed to work there. Let's go into this. With cast bullets, you got to talk about rifles and for handguns. Well, for rifles, there you have it. There is a crimping groove right there, right there. So all you would do would be to set your case mouth right at that point. And whether you crimp it like for a 30-30 or not, most of the time we don't crimp for 30-06 or 308, but for 30-30, because a lever action rifle, a lot of times we do put a crimp right there. Well, that's how you set the seating depth. Once you crimp it there, your seating depth is done. We really don't have to worry about the rifling engagement, this kind of thing, because the cast bullets are going to work fine at that seating depth where we're talking about. Now for handguns, it's pretty straightforward. For revolvers, we have the flexibility of crimping right at the top edge of the wad cutter, which is a lot of times where factory loads are crimped. Or we can place a roll crimp right into the top crimping groove of, say for instance, a Lee tumble loop bullet, which has all these grooves. We can use a top groove like a crimping groove, and that will work fine. But if you're shooting a Model 52 Smith & Wesson semi-automatic pistol shooting wad cutters, you gotta go ahead and crimp right over the top edge so that this bullet is flush with the case mouth. That's the way it is done with wad cutters. Now an exception would be like for having a full weight wad cutter that is designed to be seated like a regular bullet with the bullets outside the cartridge case like this. There's a crimping groove right there, and we just crimp it in the crimping groove. These are 44 Magnum full wad cutters from Matt's Bullets, 250 grains. Now for our fine semi-wad cutter bullet designs, they make it easy. There's a crimping groove for use in revolvers. Crimp the case mouth right there with a roll crimp, and we're in business for revolvers. Now if you're going to use the bullet in a semi-automatic pistol, the best policy is to seat the bullet so that the semi-automatic cartridge case comes right to the top edge of the shoulder, not the crimping groove, but the shoulder, and go ahead and taper crimp it there. The reason why is because if you go ahead and crimp it with the crimping groove as a guide, that leaves the whole front driving band exposed, which can hang up on the rifling lead in semi-automatic pistols, causing malfunctions. So semi-automatic pistols always seat to the top edge of the shoulder, not the crimping groove, but the shoulder, and go ahead and set the seating depth there. Now there are some semi-wad cutter designs that are specially designed for automatic pistols. The H&G 68 is one of the most famous ones for the 45 ACP, and tons of these are used. There are no crimping grooves. That's because it's designed to be used in a semi-automatic pistol. And once again, we would go ahead and seat right to the case mouth, right at the shoulder, and then taper crimp it there. And that'll work fine. However, you can use this bullet in a revolver. I use a lot of these in revolvers, and then I can crimp either with a taper crimp or with a roll crimp anywhere on the front driving band, and it works fine. So this is a very versatile bullet, can be used for both revolvers and semi-automatic pistols, even though it's designed predominantly for use in semi-autos. Now here's an example of a truncated cone bullet for a 9mm, and where do you crimp this one? Well, the answer is, even though there's no shoulder, there is a junction where the shank of the bullet meets the truncated cone, and that's where you want to set the seating depth for your 9mm case. The case mount right at that junction, and then taper crimp it there. If you're going to use this bullet in a revolver, you can crimp it anywhere on the top driving band, either with a taper crimp or with a roll crimp. Here's a good example of a big bore truncated cone. And the beauty of this one is that for a semi-automatic pistol like a 45 ACP, we would seat right to the junction of the truncated cone with a shank of the bullet, taper crimp it there. Or if we're going to use this in a revolver, it's ideal because we use a top tumble loop groove for a crimping groove, and it'll work great in our revolvers. Very versatile bullet, this one. Here's another great example of a bullet for a revolver. It's the 44 Magnum round nose bullet that actually weighs 264 grains. Supposed to only weigh 240, but it weighs 264, and there is the tapered crimping groove right there. By tapered, it actually is not a uniform groove, but it has a little angle to it with the deepest part of the groove in the front, so the case mouth can be crimped right there. Crimping grooves make the seating depth easy on revolver cast bullets. Now, some of your real heavy revolver bullets are designed with 2 crimping grooves. And you can use the front one for most shooting, but for full out magnums you're going to use the back crimping groove, and that sets the bullet farther out of the case, giving you more room for powder. And if your revolver has a long enough cylinder to allow the use of that, you're in business. Otherwise you've got to use the front crimping groove. So there's an example of a dual crimping groove bullet. Elmer Keith was one of the real pioneers that really pushed the tapered crimping groove. Here's his famous 429-421 245 grain semi-wad cutter Keith bullet. And the design there has a long nose, so more of the bullet weight is outside the case, allowing more room for powder back here. And you've got a full width driving band, 3 of them. And the case is crimped right there on that tapered crimping groove. Has a generous grease groove, which is usually on the shank of the bullet. So, gotta show you the Keith bullet. John Chinn and your daughters, thank you for the idea for this video, and I hope it really helped you out. Any questions, go ahead and comment, please. Thank you very much. And the rest of the shooters out there, reloaders, have a very nice day. See you in the next video. Bye for now.